Thanks very much, Russell, and thanks for everybody who's sticking with us, because I appreciate it's been quite a long evening, so I promise I won't go on for too long. And thanks, I've got quite a few of my farmer group members that are listening tonight, so hello to you, and thank you very much for joining us. So I'm going to talk more about the mechanism rather than getting into the detail too much of the various reasons for decline and strategies for promoting recovery, because obviously we've talked quite a lot about that already tonight, so I'll not go over that ground again. So just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Chloe Palmer. I'm an independent farm advisor working across the Peak District, and I'm the facilitator for 3 farmer groups. The longest established is Hope Valley Farmers, and then there's 2 newer groups, Bradfield Farmers and Peak District Estates. I'm really going to focus on the first 2 today, because these are the groups where we've got habitat probably more suitable for curlews and greater curlew populations. So we do have curlews in the Peak District Estates areas because it covers some of the eastern moors, but as I say, the numbers and the habitats far more relevant for the previous two groups, and both Hope Valley Farmers and Bradfield Farmers largely in the severely disadvantaged area, so you know we're talking high ground moorland as well as in-by, and quite extensive predominantly beef and sheep, some quite small scale dairy in the Bradfield parish, but excuse me, not reminiscent of large herds that you perhaps find in Cheshire and Shropshire. These are sort of smaller herds and largely still actually on straw, so not huge amounts of slurry either. So just to give you a feel of where we are, so you can see in the right hand side of the screen is the city of Sheffield. Bradfield Farmers, the area lies just to the northwest. Bradfield's actually the biggest civil parish in England, so covers a large area but largely rural despite its proximity to Sheffield. Hope Valley's just a little bit further south, so almost directly sort of southwest of Sheffield there, but very similar sort of habitat and landscape really. And there you go, there's a picture of Abney Moor looking out towards Derwent and sort of towards Kinder in the left-hand side of the screen. You can't actually see, but we do, you know, there's the incised valleys as well, which has got quite a lot of in-by, but this sort of habitat's obviously fabulous for curlew, and numbers are hanging on in there really, and a recent survey done by the National Park suggested that particularly on these managed moorland habitats, the curlews are, if anything, doing better than they were perhaps 10 years ago. So a little bit of good news in amongst a lot of perhaps more depressing updates. So and that is, you know, largely down to the farmers and moorland managers in our area really. So just sort of talking a bit about what we do and what we can do for curlew really. As I say, our group's not dedicated to the topic of curlew. We look at lots of different things. With my Hope Valley group, we do a lot about soil health. So, and obviously the hope for the Bradfield group, we only started just before COVID, so we've not made as much progress as we would have liked to. But again, it's, you know, it's a much broader remit really, not just curlew. We're looking at woodland creation, we're looking at soil health, we're looking at water quality, but curlews and waders generally are a very important theme for our members, and not surprisingly, our farmer members and moorland members are passionate about curlews. I think there's no question of doubt about that. So we were all delighted to see the Curlew Recovery Project partnership getting off the ground. So obviously farmer clusters give an opportunity for landscape scale delivery. You'll have seen from the previous slides that the 2 groups I'm talking about here cover really substantial areas, and it's an opportunity for private landowners to come together, which I think is quite unique. Obviously, one of the key things we like to do is share information and best practice. We've got some incredibly knowledgeable farmers and moorland managers amongst us who've, you know, they know far more in their little finger than I'll ever know. So bringing these people together in informal events is a great opportunity for them to share their experiences and their knowledge. And I think you know, just fostering that kind of discussion and debate is one of the key benefits of these farmer clusters. We do obviously try and encourage members to go for agri-environment schemes where they're not already in one, but I'll come on to my concerns and some of the challenges that we face with doing that. And for some farmers it's not the right thing to do, and we've got a number of members who are managing substantial areas and aren't in an agri-environment scheme at all, but are still doing wonderful things for Curlew. So it's not a one size fits all. The other thing we try and do is do quite a bit of awareness raising with the public, which is particularly important in our part of the country because we do have phenomenal numbers of visitors, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. Predation control, we've touched on that, and again, although we don't have sort of widespread coordinated predation control, it is something that, you know, as far as possible we encourage members to do, and we do offer training as well to make sure that any predation control that's being done is obviously entirely legal but also following best practice, and we were very grateful to the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust who helped us with that. So all these things, and again, you know, wider training in relation to habitat management is also vital, and we were very lucky a couple of years ago to welcome Mary, who came and did a fantastic presentation for us. I talked a bit about the role of raising awareness with the general public. You'll probably know that the Peak District is probably the most visited national park in Great Britain, and that's obviously because of our proximity to large urban areas. So we try and do our bit just to get some messages out there to people who perhaps visit the countryside but wouldn't be regular users as such, so perhaps don't have the knowledge and understanding that we would be more widespread locally. And this is a post I put up a couple of days ago. One of my farmers sent me this rather sad photo of a nest of curlew eggs that he'd found disturbed following recreational users really just unfortunately trampling it. So I put a post up. I was very polite about it, just excuse me, requesting that visitors are responsible, and it's had a phenomenal response so far. We're up to nearly 25,000 people that we've reached with this post. I think we've had nearly 220 shares now, and I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of social media in getting appropriate messages out there, really. It's about trying to be positive and not really you know, getting too negative on particular user groups or interests or whatever, but just trying to, you know, really get some key messages out there to a wider audience, you know, rather than just preaching to converted, because we are all very good at perhaps living in a bit of an echo chamber and talking amongst ourselves, but not getting at some of these things out, particularly keeping dogs on short leads, keeping to paths rather than roaming, all those things that you all know and I shan't lecture you about. So I mentioned about agri-environment schemes because the facilitation funding, which is what we are funded by, is very specific in terms of what it's aiming to do and what it will fund. And one of the key objectives is to engage farmers in agri-environment and get them to take up priority options which are identified for key themes within the groups. But this just poses challenges, and one of the biggest ones is that I am not funded to give one-to-one advice, so I can't spend time on individual farms with farmer members giving them advice on say, for example, habitat management for waders. Well, I can, but I won't get paid for it unless I charge the farmer directly. So that's a bit of a barrier, I find. And then for actually getting delivery on the ground, obviously countryside stewardship is a key mechanism for us. And again, you know, there's huge issues as we've touched on today, not least the poor and inaccurate targeting, and I'll come on and give an example of that in a second. The poor payments for severely disadvantaged land, where you look at the low input grassland option that only attracts a payment of £16 a hectare, which is laughable, really. As you know, any of you who have worked with stewardship, it's incredibly prescriptive and very inflexible. And one of my big bugbears is that where you've got farmers that are doing a fantastic job already, they really aren't getting rewarded for doing that. They'll get rewarded for doing new things and different things and extra things, but they won't just get rewarded for the fact that they've got amazing numbers of curlews because they're doing the right thing. and in any case, one of the issues is that unless you're able to get into higher tier, which has got very, you know, there's not a lot of farmers that can actually be eligible for that. You have got very few options. You're limited to the UP2, the management of rough grazing, or the low input grassland, none of which really are suited really to what we're trying to achieve here. And I think the other thing is that stewardship got off to such a bad start that a lot of farmers have just been turned off it altogether, rightly or wrongly. This slide's not come out terribly well, actually. What we're trying to show is you can just about make out some of these pink areas that I've shown. This is the Hope Valley here, and the pink areas that you can just see are the areas that are targeted for UP2, which is the upland, the rough grazing. I can never get the name of it quite correct. But basically, if farmers want to go into this option, which isn't particularly generous, but it's more generous than the £16 a hectare, and it does focus on waders and management of rough grazing for waders, they have to be in one of these pink areas. But the targeting, quite frankly, is a joke, and it doesn't actually cover any of the areas where the curlews and the lapwings and golden plover and all our other precious waders actually are. So if you, as I say, so if you don't have land in that pink area, you can't qualify for that option. I had one farmer ring me up today who was incandescent because she's got her agreement back and they've removed options from land because she said, because it wasn't targeted. And she told me, you know, it's covered in curlews. There's hundreds of curlews there. Why isn't it targeted? And we come across this time after time. And I really hope there's a lesson learned here with Elm, because if they adopt this sort of approach, you know, it really isn't going to fulfill our expectations. So just to quickly run through some of the challenges before I finish, as I mentioned, you know, we do have to deal with huge numbers of visitors, and while they're very welcome for, you know, it's great to see people getting out into the countryside and appreciating what we're all lucky enough to live amongst, it does bring with it challenges, not least because so many people have been out buying dogs and now bring them too, which again, if they're on short leads is great, but a lot of the time they're not. The other challenge is I'm really keen to get lots more data and to encourage the farmer members in our group to do lots more recording and monitoring, and I'm delighted to see the resources that the Curlew Recovery Project have brought forward for that. But it's just actually how we get this to happen. You know, it's a terribly busy time of year for our farmers. They're all lambing and calving, and shortly they'll be moving on to silage, and as you know, just trying to take 2 minutes out to do this. So I'm trying to look at ways at how we can encourage this and get more take up. The other thing is I have lots of different hats. My farmer groups are just one of the ways I earn a living. I do lots of other things besides, so I can't dedicate as much time as I'd like to actually supporting the groups. And then we've talked about this before, that all the members are under a lot of pressure in terms of making the farms viable from an economic perspective. And again, we've also mentioned predation control. One of the big issues we have in our area is that a number of the farmers that are doing their best to do legal predator control are suffering a lot of vandalism. We've got people coming out and wrecking the traps. So even when they're trying to do that, they've got the cost of this equipment being damaged and destroyed. So that's really quite depressing. So I think there's a bit of an education job to do there, really. So as we look to the future, some of the things I'm hoping we'll be able to do moving forward, again, it comes back to that monitoring that I said, if we've got that data, if we're able to measure what we've got at the moment, we'll be able to see whether we're doing a good job and how we can do better. We want to continue to feed into the environmental land management scheme to try and push for some of these better, more appropriate options to help curlews and other waders. We're looking for more funding of our own so that we can actually do more delivery on the ground outside of agri-environment schemes. And again, it's just great, I'll say it again, about the Curlew Recovery Project partnership, so we can continue to engage with partners and help to get those key messages across and get that support for farmers and moorland managers who I believe I know are desperate to do the right thing and help these birds, because there's nothing they love to see more on their farm than a healthy population of curlews. I'll finish there. This picture actually a bit of a cheaty one. It's actually taken in the Yorkshire Dales when my Hope Valley group, we all went off for a trip up there to look at the payment by results scheme. But I think it just shows you, you know, the level of enthusiasm, everybody getting involved and wanting to learn. And, you know, that is one way where the cluster groups really are a fantastic way of encouraging that. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.